Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 81 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. In this episode, I continue my interview with the FCPA professor on his new book, The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in a New Era. And once again, as with episode 80, I apologize in advance for the crummy audio. Thank you.
Hello, this is Tom Fox, and I would like to welcome you back to the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. It turns out this is part 2 of my visit with the FCPA Professor Mike Taylor and his new book, Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in a New Era. We were going to do this in one podcast, but frankly we were having too much fun and got really going, so I asked him if he could stick around and do part 2, and he graciously agreed to do so. We introduced the book in part 1, so I'm going to kind of pass on that again, other than to note it's his hardbound book, a one-volume text of all things FCPA. It's designed for a wide variety of readers, the professor type, law and business, the FCPA practitioners, both in-house and in private practice, the law student, or any businessman who might be interested with this law. It's available on Amazon.com and the professor's website, FCPAprofessor.com. So with that, Mike, if I could go directly into some of the questions I wanted to get into with you. I think that certainly you would agree that one of the jobs of a professor is to be provocative. And as the son of a professor, I certainly agree with that. You have done so in this book. You even entitled it a subchapter, Provocative Reasons, even if I can't pronounce that anymore. And the provocative reasons for perhaps an increase in FCPA enforcement. We've got an entire chapter devoted to that. So could you walk us through some of the reasons you see, and indeed go into the provocative reasons that perhaps are not as discussed publicly as much?
Yeah, and just to further say what you said, there is a chapter devoted to both practical as well as provocative reasons for the general increase in FCPA enforcement. And if one were to rank the order of these, the 4 or 5 practical reasons I think are at the top of the list. But, it's the job of a professor, I agree, to be provocative and to ask questions in a prudent and responsible manner. And I think that's what this book does by simply alerting the reader to other information that is relevant to this total mix of information for why we find ourselves in this new era of FCPA enforcement. And 2 reasons that are identified are, 1, the emergence and rapid rise of a niche industry, FCPA Inc., which is not meant as a derogatory term in the least bit.
Well, you're one of us now, so you have to agree that you're part of us.
I have to agree with that, yes. I don't dispute that in the least bit, which is further to the point that this is not meant as a derogatory term. I'm not driving policy, though. I'm not representing clients, though. I'm not making the decisions on how this law is enforced. So, I mean, yes, I agree that I do provide, a certain amount of FCPA compliance training and those things, but I'm clearly, not driving the train here. Those people who are driving the train, though, it's a fact. Again, this is a fact that FCPA enforcement is one of the only laws in the country where all enforcement is consolidated out of main justice. And what that means is, from a supervisory and discretionary standpoint, whether it's 3, 5, 4, 6, 5, 7, we literally have a very small number of people who are literally controlling an area of law. Show me any other law that has that very unique dynamic. An insider trading case can emanate from Los Angeles to Miami to New York to Chicago. A tax fraud case can be brought anywhere. It's a factual statement that FCPA enforcement is highly concentrated and highly centralized. It's a factual statement that this enforcement to a very large degree, takes place around conference room tables in Washington, D.C., pursuant to NPAs and DPAs. It is a factual statement that the self-declared architects of this new era of FCPA enforcement and nearly all individuals who previously were in a supervisory and discretionary role when it came to this law are now in the private sector, providing compliance services and other FCPA-related services against the backdrop, the landscape of the environment and the policy and the resolution vehicles they helped create. All of that is factual. Now, one can draw whatever conclusions and inferences they want from those factual statements.
Well, first of all, I wouldn't see those as problems or negative anyway, but the point I would like to challenge you on is that FCPA enforcement or FCPA work is not controlled by a small group of people, and I think you and I would be two of the best examples. You went to a large firm in the Midwest, got interested in this issue, later became a law professor. I came out of the corporate transactional world and went to a company under a DPA and developed some expertise and now help companies do FCPA compliance. I mean, I think it's open, the field is open to a wide variety of practitioners. You and I are in FCPA Inc., and I think we drive the debate on enforcement ourselves.
No, I would respectfully disagree, and I think you're missing my point. I'm not saying that there are other market participants who are providing FCPA services. You know, I mean, clearly there are, as you know it. I think, though, you have to take a step back and ask ourselves, how did we get to this point? Why did we get to this point? Did the FCPA, the statute, change? No. Was there a significant legal decision that sort of blessed this enforcement theory or that enforcement theory? No. So once you take a step back and you ask yourself, why is the FCPA industry such a unique and vibrant and for many people profitable industry, whereas it wasn't 5, 7, 10 years ago? I think you have to ask, again, as relevant to this total mix of information of, well, how did we get to this point? And the way we got to this point is through new eras being declared, new resolution vehicles being introduced, new theories being advanced, so on and so forth.
Well, I see it as policy-driven, and I think we probably disagree on that, and we've explored that in a previous podcast. So let me use that to turn to one of the issues that you specifically talk about in the book, the revolving door. Could you explain what you meant by that and how you see that as an issue that at least needs exploration?
Yeah, and I've been talking about this reform proposal for the better part of 5 years now. Given the unique attributes of FCPA enforcement that I just articulated, I think it is a good policy to have those with supervisory and discretionary authority over this niche area of law to have a 5-year post-government restriction on having an FCPA practice. Now, I think it's important to recognize that this reform proposal would literally affect maybe 5 to 10 people. You know, I'm not talking about, you know, everyone on the SEC and the DOJ's FCPA team, which they tell us they have, you know, 50 attorneys, which begs the question of what are these people actually doing on a daily basis? But that's another issue that I think we explored in a previous podcast. So recognize this reform proposal is literally focused on those people with supervisory and discretionary authority.
And then the other point that I would wonder about, though, is the revolving door suggests to me somebody came in with the intention of leaving. And while I don't see any evidence of people going into this particular field thinking that they're going to come out at the end of the day with something of value, I certainly agree with you. When they come out, they have a valuable head of knowledge about FCPA. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the term revolving door, I agree, at least traditionally has, you know, sort of referred to that. And to the extent I use the term, it's in the generic sense only. What I'm saying, though, is that these people who are in these positions, and these people are turned into immediate rock stars, right? They're on the conference circuit, they're on the speaking circuit, everyone knows who they are, whereas previously they never knew who they are. I'm just talking about, as to these 5 to 10 people, I think it's a legitimate policy objective that can accomplish a lot of things, including increasing confidence and decreasing the cynicism associated with FCPA enforcement, if these people who are making the policy decisions, advancing the enforcement theories, writing the guidance, if they would sit out for that 5-year period. And if your only disagreement, I'm not saying you, Tom, but perhaps other listeners, if your only disagreement is as to the 5-year time period, fine, make it 3, whatever. But I hope people recognize that this reform proposal would actually impact very few people, but the people it would target are driving the FCPA enforcement train. And the whole reason for this reform proposal to begin with is because the DOJ itself has created unique enforcement policies and procedures as to this one statute.
Let's turn to a concept we touched on in part 1 of our interview, and that's the difference in hard enforcement and soft enforcement. And I really wanted to explore that at some length with you, because you talk about that in the book and how they both really work together towards the overall goal of more compliance. Could you explain to the audience what those two types of enforcement are and how they work together?
Yeah, and I think this is a very important concept to grasp, including as to a compliance defense, because the compliance defense can increase soft enforcement, as perhaps we can get into. But, let's just use the speeding example. We both drove to work today, and your listeners drove to work today, and we conformed our conduct for what reason? Well, did we have a legitimate fear that we were actually going to be pulled over by the police? Hard enforcement? Or in the back of our mind, were we thinking we could perhaps, even if it's remote, be pulled over by the police? I'm guessing that most of us fit into that latter category, and because of that soft enforcement, we are conforming our conduct to what the law says. So the FCPA, and this is clear from the legislative history from congressional leaders who told us this, and I mean it's very intuitive because it makes sense, always was intended to, and has always had, in my opinion, including in this new era, more of a soft enforcement impact rather than a hard enforcement impact. Because let's face it, in any given year, and I know there's various creative counting methods out there that make FCPA enforcement appear more rigid or more numerous than it actually is. In any given year, we're talking about 7 to 10 core enforcement actions per year. That is not why the corporate community should want to comply with the FCPA. I mean, they should want to comply with the FCPA for the 3 buckets of FCPA financial exposure we talked about in part 1. The point is, the FCPA has always had a soft enforcement impact. And if you would greater incentivize business organizations to make additional investments in FCPA compliance, I think you would increase the soft enforcement impact and thus achieve more greater than we are today the objectives of the FCPA, which is, let's face it, to reduce improper payments in the global marketplace.
I was really intrigued by that, particularly in the context of your discussion of the 3 buckets. I thought that, as I said in part 1, it's not something that is probably discussed enough, but kind of putting those together, I think you presented a way for the compliance practitioners, if not think through, certainly present to the business person in a way that they hadn't really thought through before. So for me, that was one of the kind of gem takeaways from your book. The other was you talked, and this was really near and dear to my heart as a nuts and bolts guy, actually gave us some thoughts about what should go into an effective compliance program. And I realized that wasn't the focus of your book, but you devoted an entire chapter to that. But could you just kind of give your thoughts on what constitutes generally an effective compliance program?
Well, I mean, it all starts with a risk assessment, and I know I'm not articulating anything new or novel here, but, at the end of the day, FCPA risk is about specific actors engaged in specific acts in specific countries, interacting with specific foreign officials and others. So I know this sounds cliche-ish, but this whole concept of one size fits all, and we can pluck a policy off the internet, and we can pluck training slides off the internet, and here we go. That's not effective compliance, and by the way, that's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about a compliance defense. But here's a very important point too, I think, is tone at the top is important when it comes to FCPA compliance or compliance with any other law or regulation, but in my opinion, it's the most useless, overused cliche in the compliance discussion, because very, very few instances of FCPA scrutiny involve people at the top, right? Most of the root causes of FCPA scrutiny are because of rank and file employees engaged in rather mundane tasks in the global marketplace, whether it's securing foreign licenses and permits, whether it's interacting with customs or other regulatory officials. Sure, there have been situations, and regrettably there will still be situations in the future where the conduct at issue reaches the boardroom, reaches the executive suite. But for a compliance practitioner, taking a step back and saying, well, gee, what are these root causes? And then using those root causes to inform your compliance program and cascading down your compliance to where the risk points are. I know it sounds obvious, but if everyone's focused on tone at the top, you're missing the riskiest job professions. Another thing that I have increasingly been talking about is, yes, the FCPA has facilitation payments exception. Yes, the FCPA has affirmative defenses. But business organizations would be wise not to mention those and not to train on those for rank and file employees. Because why would you want rank and file employees facing pressures in the marketplace? Why would you give them terms of art and concepts such as routine governmental action, such as reasonable and bona fide? Why would you give them that information that they can use to justify and rationalize their conduct? It's sort of like the parenting analogy. Am I going to tell my kids and lecture my kids for 45 minutes for why they should clean their room, and then the last 10 minutes give them concepts in terms of art that will allow them not to clean their room? Of course not.
Like I said, that chapter was near and dear to my heart, but I think it was chapter 8. We talked about in part 1 your concluding chapter, and we're near the end of our time for part 2, so I would just like to ask, what are some of the takeaways you would like a reader to take away from your book?
Yeah, again, I think terms of art can sometimes advance the ball and are effective, accomplish learning objectives. My goal in this book, and indeed in my FCPA Institute that I have for the marketplace, and indeed at my FCPA class here at Southern Illinois University School of Law, is to provide the learners, no matter where they are in their career, with a pair of FCPA goggles. And I know that sounds a bit silly, but being able to view your profession, whether it's an executive, whether it's an auditor, whether it's a financial professional, or whether it's obviously an in-house counsel, being able to view your profession with a new lens, a new prism, to spot risk. And in order to spot risk, you obviously need to know what the enforcement climate is about. You need to know what the statute is about. But having FCPA goggles to spot risk And quite frankly, part of having FCPA goggles is asking critical questions. It's important in this new era not just for people to have practical skills as to the new era, but to have a base level of knowledge so that they themselves can ask the critical questions that are worthy of exploration in this new era. So the goal of the book is the FCPA goggles, recognizing that it's not only practical skills, but critical skills as well, so that readers can come to their own conclusion about this new era of FCPA enforcement.
Well, Mike, we're at the end of our time for part 2. I'm going to show our viewers, if not our listeners, a copy of your book again, The Foreign Court Practices Act of the New Era. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to visit with me for parts 1 and 2 of this podcast. I would urge anyone interested in this law to go out and buy this book. It is an excellent text. It's not a light read, but I don't find it a difficult read. For those who want more detail, it is, of course, filled with endnotes and references to secondary sources that you can go to should you want further exploration. And with that, I would thank you very much and look forward to our next visit.
Thank you.